So Roger, we've been talking about a lot of things here. We've been talking about the communications technology. We've been talking about the collaboration between the suppliers. We've been talking about building robotic. We're talking about humans' involvement. What do you think is the synergy that's really the most important part of that you've seen over the 20 plus years that you've been covering this industry?
The synergy of all, well, what's happening that's a little bit different is a recognition that we're going to have more sensors on the car. We want to interpret the information coming off of those sensors in real time with sufficient power, which is going to mean we're going to have to change the fundamental network technology that's in the car, most likely to Ethernet or an equivalent. And we're going to need to connect the telecommunications control unit to the CAN bus, Ethernet bus.
Some kind of vehicle bus, right?
Yes.
And it's not a bus that's going down the road with, children in it, right?
Well, we want the fastest, most efficient means of getting information to that processor, which is going to be aggregating and making decisions about what information needs to be shared with the cloud or pulled from the cloud to enable a safer driving experience.
You mentioned the processor, and a lot of people just think of, let's have a robotic autonomous car. We're going to have this massive data center on wheels, if you will. And is it really going to be one big computer, or is it going to be a bunch of small computers that cooperate with each other? What is your observation of what you see kind of the world heading towards as the industry tries to bridge the gap between the research work and the real production cars that have to be shipped in volume out of factories?
Well, there's two paths forward, but they're both leading towards autonomy. One is an evolutionary path, kind of camera-based, and the other is a little bit of a faster path, but it's sort of casting cost concerns to the wind. So put in whatever processing is required, whatever storage is required, whatever connectivity is required, whatever network, put it in now. Doesn't matter what the cost is. Okay, well, that's not going to be a vehicle anybody's going to own. That's going to be some kind of a shared public transportation kind of a resource, whereas the evolutionary proposition will also have very powerful processing technology, but within the confines of the cost constraints of making a car that a consumer could own. And that will be, maybe it's stretching it a bit to say semi-autonomous, but certainly safer.
Autonomous enhanced, maybe. Thinking of terms to describe that. And I wanted to ask you, because you've been covering the automotive industry so well, have you ever found the automakers to be the ones that throw money?
No. So that's why I think car makers are very pleased to discover how much value they can get out of a single forward-facing camera or multiple cameras all around the vehicle, as well as cameras inside the vehicles. It's a very low-cost resource. It's multifunction, and what you need some processing power to interpret the information coming off of that device. But it's a bit of a revelation. Something I like to call the automotive industry's equivalent of the Cambrian explosion. So there's a theory called the light switch theory that explains the explosion in number of life forms on the planet in the Cambrian explosion, which was that living organisms became sighted and gained other senses as well, which is a direct parallel to what's happening in the automotive industry. Now, it's a theory, but it's a theory that works very well.
We weren't there.
Yes. No, it's hard to say. Hundreds of millions of years ago. But if you look at what's happening in cars, clearly the introduction of sensors into the car, particularly camera, but other kinds of sensors as well, have opened the door to new ways of building cars and creating safer driving experiences.
Well, this is an interesting crossover between the technology that can be in the car by choice, by the consumer's demand, or maybe by the car maker's preference, or let's say the government regulation that might come into the picture. We're all pretty familiar with the idea of having a rear backup camera, and that's to save lives, right? Some lives have been lost, unfortunately, because of people literally not knowing what's behind them. So the solution was, well, we'll put a camera there and we'll put a screen in front of the driver. But there's no assurance that the driver's going to look at that screen. So is that really enough? And is perhaps that the reason we don't have those in all cars yet?
Well, that is coming, and that is a requirement. I think a more impactful technology or a mandate, right now it's just a part of a guideline, a recommended adoption, is the forward-facing camera for automatic emergency braking. But I think we're going to be taking a closer look at things like lane keeping and blind spot detection and adaptive cruise control, and how these technologies can be integrated to provide a safer driving experience. So we've got advertisements on TV right now showing cars braking for pedestrians. I hope we're not creating inappropriate expectations among consumers, but we are selling cars around the idea of safety. Safety sells. So I think there is a role for regulatory participation in these activities. For example, if your car doesn't have automatic emergency braking, maybe you don't get a 5-star safety rating. So, and so that's kind of a Euro NCAP mentality.
Sort of an incentive.
Yeah. It's about saving lives, reducing emissions, improving the efficiency of vehicle operation, and reducing congestion.
Well, I've been working with automotive suppliers and emerging automotive suppliers for years. And one of the things that I've learned most recently is that the most frustrating experience for the suppliers, and that could be the silicon suppliers, software integrators, all of them, is that they normally are accustomed to working off of very concrete requirements. The requirements for their product are written down in such a rigorous manner that they know exactly what they're delivering. But when it comes into the space of autonomy, we call it requirements confusion, because even the automakers don't know what to ask for. It's very difficult. Do you see any progress being made to, let's say, eliminate or reduce some of that confusion?
There are a variety of efforts out there to look at different ways to address these standards requirements that, as you say, really can't necessarily be fulfilled without this mentality of, oh, you have to drive 3 billion miles to guarantee this performance or this function. What car makers are trying to do, and their suppliers, is use simulation to try to advance that activity, because it would be absurd to try to actually drive those billions of miles, but to try to recreate all the potential scenarios that a car might encounter. It is a little bit of a old school, old-fashioned requirement that the car makers have. I think we're seeing some reevaluation of that and some flexibility around that, and I think even the regulators are lowering the bar a little bit, saying, okay, we're willing to let some things go because we have such an overriding interest in reaping the benefits of autonomous driving. And so we're in a little bit of a gray area, but what we're seeing on the regulatory side is a light touch, more of a hands-off approach, not a strenuous, no, you can't do that approach.
Well, I wanted to ask you one more thing, and that is how you view the work between these regulatory bodies and, let's say, the standards organizations that are closer to the automotive industry, such as SAE, and then some of the market hype and excitement, I don't want to be negative or positive, that even our company, Renesys, with its Renesys Autonomy program, are using terminology such as autonomy, which SAE themselves is trying to deprecate the term. How do you think that's going to work out? Do you think that the standards will be more, let's say, become more disciplined about the way things are marketed? Will the major car makers not be able to call a car autonomous because the standards don't allow that? They want to call it a highly automated or highly automated driving or automated driving system, because technically you can't make it autonomous according to the way SAE looks at it. Have you thought about that?
So I think SAE has put out a vision that's very clear, and unfortunately multiple car makers and suppliers have muddied the waters by making inappropriate claims about performance and setting inappropriate expectations. Tesla was first, but even Audi talks about level 3 in describing a system that they have that really isn't level 3.
According to SAE, which is accepted pretty much, right?
So I think we're going to go through a period of sort of misinformation. There probably will be some wrist slapping and maybe even some unpleasantness, and guarantee there will be a significant amount of consumer confusion. But I think at the end of the day, somebody somewhere along the way is going to, consolidate the messaging around some acceptable terms. Okay, so Tesla still hasn't really corrected its nomenclature, but I think there will be slowly a recognition that we need to be clearer. Even in the advertisements, I get a little nervous when I see, cars braking for pedestrians. Is that going to work 100% of the time? Maybe not. Are we trying to set up an expectation that it will? I hope not.
And therefore, pedestrians pop out randomly like they do in Phoenix, where I live. I couldn't believe it. I moved from Detroit to Phoenix, and one of the first things I noticed is pedestrians would pop out from between parked cars. You have to operate it at a crawling speed, and you can't even detect a pedestrian with a camera when he's between two parked cars.
Joel, I think we can agree Phoenix is a special place.
It is a special place. And this has been a special moment with you. I really appreciate your time. Roger, it's great to see you again. Great to have you here.
My pleasure.
Thanks
Thank you,
for
Joel.
joining.